Nothing is technically wrong. Your heart is still beating. Your body still moves through the same routines. You wake up. You respond. You function. From the outside, you are alive. And that's why no one notices. Because nothing collapsed. Nothing ended. Nothing forced the world to stop and ask where you went. You didn't disappear physically. You disappeared internally. Not all at once. Gradually. Quietly. You started leaving moments before they finished. Conversations before they reached you. Days before they meant anything. You were there, but not inside them. You smiled when expected. You answered when spoken to. You completed what needed to be done. But something essential wasn't present. Not your body. Your presence. Presence is difficult to measure. There's no test for it. No diagnosis. No visible signal that tells you when it begins fading. You only notice it when something feels distant, while it's still happening. When experiences don't fully register. When emotions feel muted. When reality feels slightly out of reach, you begin to feel like an observer, not of the world, of yourself. You watch yourself speak, watch yourself respond, watch yourself continue, as if your life is unfolding in front of you, without requiring you to be inside it. Nothing feels urgent, nothing feels real enough to hold on to. Moments pass through you without resistance, without impact, without permanence. You tell yourself you're just tired, just distracted, just overwhelmed. But exhaustion doesn't explain this. Distraction doesn't explain this. This isn't the absence of energy. It's the absence of you. Somewhere along the way, your life stopped needing your presence to continue. Your body learned the sequence. Your mind learned the script. Your identity learned the performance. And you learned how to remain invisible inside it. You didn't stop existing. You stopped arriving. You're alive, but you're not here. At first, it just felt like fatigue. A normal kind of tired. The kind people expect, the kind you don't question. You told yourself you just needed rest, needed time, needed space to recover. But rest didn't bring you back. Time didn't restore anything. Space only made the distance clearer. Because this wasn't exhaustion. Exhaustion drains your energy. This drained your presence. You could still do everything, still complete tasks, still maintain conversations, still continue your life without interruption. And that's what made it invisible. Nothing stopped working. You still functioned. Function became your replacement for presence. You learned how to respond automatically, how to say the right things without feeling them, how to move through your life without fully entering it. You became efficient at existing, efficient at maintaining the version of yourself your life expected. Efficiency removes friction. Friction is where presence lives. Without friction, everything becomes smooth, predictable, distant. You stopped resisting your life. Not because you accepted it, because you stopped engaging with it. Engagement requires energy. Engagement requires vulnerability. Engagement requires you to be inside the moment. It was easier to remain outside of it, to observe, to continue, to survive. Survival doesn't require presence. It requires repetition. You began repeating yourself, repeating your routines, repeating your reactions, repeating your identity, not consciously, automatically. Automatic living removes uncertainty. Automatic living removes risk. Automatic living removes you. You didn't leave your life. Your life adapted to your absence. It learned how to continue without waiting for you to arrive. And the longer it continued, the harder it became to remember what it felt like to be fully here. You don't remember the exact moment it started, because it didn't feel like a moment. It felt like a process, a slow separation between your body and your presence inside it. At first, it was subtle. You stopped reacting as strongly as you used to. Things that once moved you barely registered. Not because they didn't matter, because you weren't fully there to receive them. You told yourself this was maturity, emotional control, stability. You believed you were becoming stronger, less affected, less vulnerable, less exposed. But strength wasn't what was happening. Distance was. Distance protects you. Distance reduces impact. Distance makes everything easier to manage. You don't feel as much. You don't risk as much. You don't lose as much. But distance also removes something else. Aliveness. You began to notice how quickly moments ended. Not in time, in meaning. You would experience something and immediately feel it slipping away. Not because it ended, because you were never fully inside it. You became someone who was always slightly removed, slightly behind your own life. Watching yourself speak, watching yourself respond, watching yourself continue. Continuation became automatic. Automatic continuation requires no presence, only sequence. You wake up, you move, you respond, You sleep. Sequence repeats. Sequence stabilizes your life. Sequence replaces your participation in it. Participation requires awareness. Awareness requires presence. Presence requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires you to feel everything. Feeling everything is overwhelming. So your system adapted. It reduced your presence to protect you, not as a decision, as a survival response. Your nervous system learned something important. It learned that full presence is unpredictable. Full presence exposes you to uncertainty. Uncertainty exposes you to pain. Pain threatens stability. So your system chose stability. It chose predictability. It chose continuation. Continuation doesn't require you. Continuation requires only your body. Your body stayed. Your presence stepped back. Not permanently, protectively. You began living from a distance, not physically, psychologically. You stopped entering moments completely. You entered them partially. Enough to function, not enough to feel. Feeling deeply creates risk. Feeling deeply creates disruption. Disruption creates change. Change threatens the identity your life stabilized around. So your system preserved that identity. It preserved the version of you that could survive, not the version of you that could fully exist. You became someone who could continue. Continuation became your default state. Default states remove effort. Default states remove awareness. Default states remove choice. Choice requires presence. Presence requires you to arrive. You stopped arriving, not because you wanted to, because you learned how not to. You learned how to remain protected. Protected from disappointment. Protected from uncertainty. Protected from yourself. Your life became quieter. Not externally, internally. Your reactions softened. Your emotions flattened. Your curiosity faded. Not because those parts of you disappeared, because they were no longer needed. Maintenance replaced exploration. Exploration requires presence. Maintenance requires repetition. Repetition creates predictability. Predictability creates safety. Safety creates absence. Absence became familiar. Familiar absence feels normal. You forgot what presence felt like. Not completely, just enough. Enough to stop questioning it. Enough to stop searching for it. Enough to accept continuation as your natural state. You became someone who existed reliably. Reliability made you stable. Stability made you functional. Functionality made you invisible to yourself. Invisible inside your own life. Nothing forced you to notice, because nothing broke. Nothing collapsed. Nothing stopped working. Your life continued successfully. Success hides absence well. Success hides distance well. Success hides disappearance perfectly. You told yourself you were fine. You told yourself this is what adulthood feels like. You told yourself everyone lives this way. And maybe they do, but that doesn't change what happened. You stopped being fully here, not in one moment, across many moments, across years of adaptation, across years of protecting yourself from uncertainty, across years of choosing stability over presence, until stability became your identity and presence became unfamiliar. You didn't stop living, you stopped inhabiting your life. And the most unsettling part is, your life never stopped moving forward without you. There comes a moment when you notice it, not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. You're in the middle of something ordinary, a conversation, a routine, a familiar sequence you've completed 1,000 times before. And for a second, you see it. You see yourself from the outside, not metaphorically, psychologically. You hear your voice speaking, but it doesn't feel connected to you. You feel your body moving, but it doesn't feel directed by you. Everything is happening without requiring you to be fully inside it. And that's when the realization appears. Your life learned how to continue without your presence, not because it rejected you, because it adapted. Adaptation keeps systems stable. Your life is a system. Your identity is a system. Your routines are a system. Systems prioritize continuation, not presence. Presence is unpredictable. Presence disrupts sequence. Sequence guarantees survival. So, sequence replaced you. Not physically, internally. You became someone who could operate automatically. Automatic living is efficient. Efficiency reduces friction. Friction is where awareness begins. Without friction, there is nothing to interrupt the pattern. Patterns repeat. Patterns stabilize identity. Identity stabilizes behavior. Behavior stabilizes life. Your life stabilized around your absence. You became reliable. Reliability made you safe. Reliability made you predictable. Reliability made you distant. Distance protects you. Distance reduces emotional exposure. Distance reduces vulnerability. Distance allows you to continue without interruption. Interruption creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates fear. Fear creates instability. Instability threatens survival. So, your system preserves stability, even if stability meant losing presence. Presence is not required for survival. Only function is. You continued functioning. You continued responding. You continued existing. But existence is not the same as being here. Being here requires participation. Participation requires awareness. Awareness requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires you to risk feeling. Feeling creates uncertainty. Uncertainty threatens stability. So your system made a choice, not consciously. Biologically, it reduced your presence, reduced your awareness, reduced your participation. Enough to protect you, not enough to stop your life. Your life kept moving, kept progressing, kept expanding externally, while internally, you remained in the same place. You stopped evolving with it. Your life moved forward. You stayed behind, not physically, psychologically. You became someone observing their own continuation. Continuation doesn't ask how you feel. Continuation asks only that you continue. You learned how to continue perfectly. You completed expectations, completed routines, completed responsibilities. Completion creates closure. Closure stabilizes identity. Stable identity removes uncertainty. Uncertainty is where presence lives. Without uncertainty, presence fades. You stop feeling urgency, stopped feeling anticipation, stopped feeling movement. Everything felt predetermined. Predetermined lives require no presence. They require compliance. You complied. You complied with the identity your life constructed. You complied with the expectations your environment reinforced. You complied with the sequence your past decisions created. Compliance preserved stability. Stability preserved survival. Survival preserved continuation. Continuation preserved your absence. And absence became permanent enough to feel normal. You forgot what it felt like to arrive fully. Forgot what it felt like to exist inside your own experiences. Forgot what it felt like to be here. Not responding. Not performing. Not continuing. Being. Being requires presence. Presence requires you to risk disruption. Disruption threatens everything you've stabilized. So you remained absent. Absent inside a life that never stopped moving. A life that never stopped needing your function, but stopped needing your presence. You became a perfect participant in a life you no longer inhabited. And the most dangerous part is, nothing is forcing you to come back. The realization doesn't feel like panic. It feels like grief. Not grief for something that ended. Grief for something that continued. Without you. Because when you begin to see it, you can't unsee it. You notice how often you're missing. Not physically, mentally, emotionally, existentially. You are present in location, absent in experience. You start remembering moments that should have meant more. Moments you waited for, worked toward, sacrificed for. Moments that arrived and passed through you without leaving anything behind. No imprint, no permanence, no proof you were ever fully there. You remember smiling, but not feeling joy. You remember achieving something, but not feeling fulfilled. You remember being surrounded by people, but not feeling connected. Not because those moments were empty, because you were not empty of value, empty of presence. Presence is what makes moments real. Without presence, everything feels temporary, replaceable, distant. You begin to understand something unsettling. Your life didn't stop being meaningful. You stopped being there to experience its meaning. Meaning requires participation. Participation requires presence. Presence requires you to arrive. You stopped arriving, not intentionally, protectively. Protection creates distance. Distance creates absence. Absence creates grief. Grief for moments you can't return to. Grief for experiences you never fully lived. Grief for time that passed without you inside it. You begin to wonder how long it's been this way. When was the last time you felt fully here, not distracted, not performing, not observing? Here, you search your memory, not for events, for presence. Presence is harder to find because presence doesn't leave evidence. It leaves feeling, and feeling is what disappeared. You didn't lose your life, you lost your connection to it. That loss is invisible. Invisible losses are the hardest to explain. From the outside, everything still looks intact. You are still functioning, still progressing, still continuing. But internally, you feel the absence. Absence of urgency, absence of depth, absence of yourself. You begin to feel like a witness to your own existence. You watch yourself making decisions. Watch yourself completing routines. Watch yourself living a life that no longer requires your presence to continue. That realization changes something. Not externally, internally. You begin to feel the distance more clearly. You begin to see the separation between your body and your being. Your body stayed. Your being stepped back, not as a choice, as a defense. Defense protects you from overwhelm, protects you from pain, protects you from uncertainty, but protection also removes you from your life. You became safe. Safety became your prison, not a visible prison, an internal one. You are free to move, free to act, free to continue, but not free to feel fully here. Feeling fully here requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires risk. Risk threatens stability. Stability preserved your survival. But survival is not the same as living. Living requires presence. Presence requires courage. Courage requires you to step back into your life. You haven't stepped back yet. You are still watching, still observing, still existing from a distance. And that distance hurts. Not sharply, quietly. A quiet ache. An ache for something you can't name. An ache for something you once had. An ache for yourself. You begin to realize something that feels almost unbearable. Your life never stopped needing you. You stopped giving it yourself. And now, you don't know how to come back. Coming back doesn't begin with action. It begins with interruption. A moment that doesn't follow the sequence. A moment that doesn't behave the way your life normally behaves. It catches you off guard. Not because it's dramatic, because it's real. You feel something, not strongly, but unmistakably. A reaction that doesn't belong to the version of you that learned how to remain distant. It doesn't feel efficient. It doesn't feel controlled. It feels alive. Alive in a way that makes you uncomfortable, because you haven't felt it in so long. Presence doesn't return as clarity. It returns as disruption. Disruption interrupts patterns. Patterns are what kept your life stable. Patterns are what allowed your life to continue without you. Now something interrupts them. You pause. Not physically, internally. Inside that pause, you notice yourself, not your identity, not your role, not the version of you that knows how to function. Yourself, unfiltered, unprotected, unmaintained, and it feels unfamiliar. Not because it's new, because it's been absent. You realize how much of your life operates automatically, how easily you move through routines without awareness, how rarely you stop. Stopping creates space. Space creates awareness. Awareness creates presence. Presence creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates risk. Risk is what your system learned to avoid. Avoidance kept you safe. Avoidance kept you stable. Avoidance kept you absent. Now avoidance weakens. Not because you forced it, because something inside you wants to feel again. Feeling is dangerous. Feeling exposes you. Exposes what you lost. Exposes what you missed. Exposes how long you've been gone. That exposure hurts. Not violently. Honestly, honesty disrupts the illusion of continuation. Continuation told you everything was fine. Continuation told you this is normal. Continuation told you this is life. But life was never meant to be something you observe. Life was meant to be something you inhabit. You stopped inhabiting it. Now something inside you wants to return. Return to uncertainty. Return to awareness. Return to presence. Presence is fragile at first. It doesn't arrive as permanence. It arrives as moments. Small moments. Moments where you feel something real. Moments where you notice something you normally ignore. Moments where you stop functioning and start existing. Existence feels different. Existence feels unstable. Unstable feels dangerous. Dangerous feels alive. You begin to understand why you left. Presence is intense. Presence requires energy. Presence requires you to risk being affected. Being affected creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates unpredictability. Unpredictability threatens control. Control made your life manageable. Manageable made your life stable. Stable made your life empty. Empty made your life easier to survive. Survival became your identity. Now survival feels insufficient. Not wrong, incomplete. Incomplete creates tension. Tension creates awareness. Awareness creates choice. Choice creates possibility. Possibility creates fear. Fear creates opportunity. Opportunity requires courage. Courage is what you lost when you stopped being here. Now courage begins to return, not as confidence, as willingness. Willingness to feel again. Willingness to notice again. Willingness to exist again. You begin to see something clearly. Your absence was never permanent. It was protective. Your system protected you from something. From overwhelm, from loss, from uncertainty. Protection helped you survive. But protection also removed you from your life. Now survival is no longer enough. Now something deeper is asking for your return. Return doesn't require changing your life. Return requires entering it. Entering the moments you normally pass through. Entering the experiences you normally observe. Entering the emotions you normally avoid. Entering yourself. You realize something important. Your life never rejected you. You step back from it. Step back to survive. Now you can step forward. Not completely. Not instantly. Gradually. Presence returns in fragments. Fragments become moments. Moments become awareness. Awareness becomes identity. Identity becomes existence. Existence becomes life. Life begins to feel real again. Not easier. Real. Real includes discomfort. Real includes uncertainty. Real includes vulnerability. Real includes you. You are still here. You never left completely. You were waiting for the moment you stopped hiding from your own life. That moment has begun. Not because everything changed, because you did. You stopped disappearing and started returning. Returning doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like exposure, because the moment you begin to come back, you see everything differently, not your life. Your absence inside it. You see how many moments passed without you. How many conversations you never fully entered. How many experiences you never fully lived. Not because you weren't there, because you weren't present. And presence changes everything. Presence makes moments heavier, more permanent, more real. Real is what you avoided, not consciously, protectively. Protection kept you functional. Protection kept you stable. Protection kept you alive. But protection also kept you hidden. Hidden inside routines. Hidden inside expectations. Hidden inside the identity you learned how to maintain. Maintenance made you predictable. Predictability made you safe. Safety made you invisible. Invisible to yourself. Now that invisibility begins to dissolve. Not completely. Enough to feel it. You feel yourself inside your life again. Not constantly. In flashes. Flashes of awareness. Flashes of clarity. Flashes of presence. Presence interrupts automatic living. Automatic living was easier. Automatic living required nothing from you. Presence requires everything. Your attention, your emotion, your vulnerability, your courage. Courage to feel what you avoided. Courage to experience what you numbed. Courage to exist without distance. Distance protected you. Distance removed intensity. Distance removed risk. Distance removed you. Now you are closer. Closer to your thoughts. Closer to your feelings. Closer to your existence. Closeness feels unfamiliar. Unfamiliar feels unstable. Unstable feels alive. Alive feels overwhelming. Overwhelming feels honest. Honesty reveals something important. You were never fully gone. You were partially hidden. Hidden behind adaptation. Hidden behind survival. Hidden behind the version of yourself your life required. Now that version begins to weaken. Not because it failed, because it is no longer necessary. Survival brought you here. Presence allows you to stay. Staying is different from continuing. Continuing happens automatically. Staying requires choice. Choice requires awareness. Awareness requires presence. Presence requires courage. You have that courage now, not because you became stronger, because you stopped avoiding yourself. Avoidance created your absence. Attention creates your return. You begin to notice your life differently. Moments feel slower, not in time, in depth. You experience things more fully, not always comfortably. Fully. Full experience includes everything. Joy, fear, uncertainty, connection, discomfort. Discomfort reminds you that you are here. Comfort allowed you to disappear. Discomfort brings you back. You no longer move through your life automatically. You move through it consciously. Conscious living requires effort. Effort creates friction. Friction creates transformation. Transformation creates identity. Identity is no longer something you maintain. Identity becomes something you experience. You experience yourself again, not as a role, not as a function, as a presence. Presence changes your relationship with existence. Existence is no longer something that happens to you. Existence becomes something that includes you. You stop observing your life. You start inhabiting it. Inhabiting means risking uncertainty. Uncertainty means risking change. Change means risking who you are. You are no longer afraid of that risk because you understand something now. The real danger was never change. The real danger was absence. Absence allowed your life to continue without you. Presence brings you back into it, not to control it, to experience it. Experience makes life meaningful. Meaning was never missing. You were. Now you are here. Not perfectly, not permanently, but honestly. Honesty is enough. Enough to feel. Enough to exist. Enough to live. You don't need to become someone new. You need to stop disappearing from who you already are. Because the truth is, you were never afraid of life ending. You were afraid it would continue without you inside it.